Hello, I'm Milena Miller, and I want to welcome you to the program today. I have three guests with me today. We are all members of the BOR Committee, B-O-R, for Bill of Rights Committee here in Athens, Ohio. We've been sort of at the forefront of a campaign to place on the ballot this November an initiative to help save and protect our water. Some call it an anti-fracking measure, but the main goal is to save and protect our clean water. So I'd like to just first of all refer to a piece that was on Echo Watch this last week regarding, the title of the piece was "Ohio Singled Out for Worst Fracking Waste Disposal Practices." This was based upon a study by the Government Office of Accountability, and it was requested by 7 senators, and they took a study with the 8 main states in the union that are doing most of the fracking, Ohio included. And of the 8, California, Colorado, Kentucky, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Texas, all of them, but Ohio, required information on waste content that was being taken from these injection wells when fracking companies are doing fracking in an area. And all of them were able to provide that. They all had requirements, they all had information about their waste materials. Only Ohio does not have any does not require us to know what kinds of waste materials are coming from that. So I just wanted to open with that thought in mind, and why the 4 of us and so many of our friends and neighbors are really concerned about this issue. I'd like to introduce John Howell. I think he can give us some background information about some of the beginnings of why we got this together in the first place, and some other scientific information, perhaps.
Thanks, Milena. Let me begin by referring to the fact that this concern about water quality and the potential impacts of fracking has been around for quite a number of years, but it has been gaining strength as the drilling and fracking and production of the injection wells is increasing rapidly in eastern Ohio and beginning to impinge more closely on Athens, on our community. And there have been many activists who have been working for some time concerned about this process, and have done a great deal of work trying to get the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to impose stricter regulations on this process to enhance our safety and the safety of our water supplies. This attempt to get the ODNR, and it is the ODNR that has the exclusive authority over shale gas and oil drilling entirely within the state. So it is that agency that has been delegated by the government to oversee that process and presumably impose regulations that protect the people. Although many of the activists in this area have felt that those regulations have been very weak, as suggested by the comments that Milena already made, and that which has frustrated the efforts to stop this process, or at least slow it down until there's adequate knowledge about the potential effects of fracking. So out of that frustration, really, an alternative approach was born. And that approach came out of the experience of a number of people in Pennsylvania who actually were not concerned initially about fracking. They were initially concerned about corporate farms invading their areas, and these were areas in central Pennsylvania. And the people in those towns wanted to stop these huge corporate farms because of the smell and the contamination of their groundwater from these operations, and the general negative effects these farms were having on the area. They went to a group of young law students in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to ask for some help. And out of that, and those law students, who were just students at the time, as a matter of fact, helped those people in those towns look carefully at the applications that these companies had submitted to the Pennsylvania Environmental Protection Agency. And what they found is these applications had been very poorly done, and the fact is they didn't even meet up with the requirements that were imposed by the regulations of the EPA. So the people in those towns were able to say to the EPA, you can't approve this because it doesn't meet your own requirements. Mm-hmm. And so they were able to block it, and they felt very good about that. They had won. Mm-hmm. And of course, what happened out of that was that the corporations thanked them very much for showing them the errors in their applications. They fixed those errors, resubmitted, and the EPA now could do nothing but approve them because all their regulations had in fact been met. Mm-hmm. But it didn't change the fact that those corporate farms were still going in. Out of that experience, these lawyers, these law students who then became lawyers, yes, and started a nonprofit organization called the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, set out to find a more satisfactory approach that might actually work, since this business of trying to get the government agencies that are supposed to protect to actually protect weren't protecting. What their approach was to do was to appeal to the inalienable rights we have as citizens, and these include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as spelled out in the Declaration of Independence. It also includes in the Ohio Constitution the word safety. I don't know what was in the Pennsylvania Constitution, probably something like that, but at any rate, the lesson for all of this, as we apply it here in southeastern Ohio, is that rather than trying to get this rather cumbersome and unresponsive government agency that's supposed to protect us, let's do something different. Let's essentially appeal to the Ohio Constitution that says we have an inalienable right to life, to safety. And these things that are being done in our area are real threats to that safety, to that health, to that pursuit of happiness, to life itself. These are toxins that are being spread. So the result of that is the Bill of Rights Committee formed to try to put together an initiative to go on the ballot, essentially to claim that we have these rights, and that's why it's called the Bill of Rights Committee, that we have these inalienable rights, and that in order for these inalienable rights to be respected, we have to forbid this activity within our city. It is not safe. Despite the fact that the Ohio law, the code, the Ohio Revised Code, gives that authority to the ODNR, the Bill of Rights Committee and the initiative that it will be on the ballot in November, basically says that in order to protect our rights, this activity has to be forbidden, and it is not that we are in violation of the highest law of the land. It is that the state law, the Ohio Revised Code, in giving that authority to ODNR, is in violation of our rights. So that is the rationale of Issue 7, to simply claim that we as citizens of Athens have this right to clean water, and it should not be threatened, and we do not accept the idea that it should be threatened by this kind of activity, corporate activity of drilling and injection wells and all of this. And the fundamental issue here at stake is, in a sense, revolves around whether or not this activity really does threaten our safety, our water, and so on. And I think there is increasing evidence that some of the others may wish to speak about, that this activity has been shown in many places to be very hazardous to water supplies and hazardous for communities in other ways as well, so that it will not be difficult to establish, if in fact this law is challenged, as it may well be once it is passed, that it will not be difficult to establish that there is a reasonable basis for our claim that these activities do represent a violation of our inalienable rights.
Very well said, John. I would like to, and I'm glad you said that this is all about the initiative, which is Issue 7. That's what the name of that particular issue is going to be on the ballot. And for those in our audience who are listening to us, I think we should probably mention the fact that in other states where fracking and fracking activities are being conducted, it is the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the lead agency in most cases. However, in the state of Ohio, it is the task of regulating all of these activities has been given to the ODNR, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, by our governor, Governor Kasich, who was instrumental from the very beginning of his governorship in building these relationships particularly with Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Now, sometimes it's said that the geology there in those states does not permit or allow these waste materials from the fracking to then be injected back into, or whether it's their own laws, whatever the case may be, they are not generally injecting most of their waste materials, but they are transporting them out of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And those waste materials are contractually signed and delivered to Ohio. So this is why we have over 240 injection wells currently in Ohio. We have a map here that our viewers probably can't see very well, but I can tell you that when I look at the map, there are numerous purple dots on the map that indicate violations where these injection wells exist. And as one of my guests here today, Jeff Reisner, was mentioning earlier, we don't know how many violations those particular wells have had, but I can pretty much see from looking at the map that I would guess that half of these 240 injection wells have had one or more violations. And I think that's a pretty strong reason for us to be concerned about what's happening, particularly when, and I might mention this, there's Ohio Senate Bill 315, which was passed in May 2012. It includes a provision that allows these companies to exempt themselves from disclosing the chemicals that they often declare them a trade secret. So in other words, they don't have to be held to task to tell those of us who are residents and taxpayers who are concerned about our water who live here in Ohio. They don't have to disclose to us, and the ODNR does not have to require that of them, that they disclose any of those waste materials. And we know some of them. We know that there's toluene and benzene and all these other carcinogenics. They're often high in radiation poisoning. So it isn't a question of can we be poisoned by these waste materials? It's a question of when we will be poisoned. And I can personally speak from experience of having had my own water years ago contaminated by the ever popular C8 that was released into our water supply here in southeastern Ohio. Many of us, actually between northern West Virginia and southeastern Ohio, there were 70,000 of us who were subjected to having this chemical put into our water supplies, and we knew nothing about it until some unsuspecting farmer actually had lost a lot of his cattle. And that's what got the ball rolling on this lawsuit with the DuPont Chemical Company. But we on the Bork Committee are trying to be proactive here, and we are not, by the way, the only committee. Jeff, I'm going to bring you on board, but we are not the only committee of concerned residents in the state of Ohio who are facing these kinds of issues about safety and unalienable rights and the other kinds of quality of life issues. Would you like to speak to that, Jeff Reisner, a little bit? He's one of our Athens City Councilmen and also a member of this committee and a concerned citizen.
Well, there's other communities that's been involved in this. You can see the map up there. I think Broadview Heights, Mansfield, Oberlin, Yellow Springs all have existing Bork ordinances, Bill of Rights. Some of them are, as the Broadview Heights is very controversial and is being litigated at this moment. In that case, it was an example of the barn door was open, the horses are out, and then the residents realized, well, we should try to do something. By the time they actually got anything going, there were well over 80 wells already drilled within the residential neighborhoods. And I mean literally, as an example, you would say you go into the Oakmont edition here in Athens. You drive down, you see quarter-acre lots, you see fine homes. In the case of Broadview Heights, you'd have the same thing, only you would have home, fracking well, mud pit, trucks going in and out, and then home, another well being drilled. And at that point, the people just said, enough's enough, and they got an initiative, and they actually, despite everything that the city government, which I think, well, I don't know, I don't want to slander anybody, but it's just unspeakable what they were doing in their own community.
Well, some of these
it passed. It did pass. Yeah. And now, of course, the people who are making millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, we're talking multi-billion-dollar here.
Right.
We're not just talking tens of millions. This is beyond that. We're talking tens of billions.
Right.
So the amount of money that's flowing in here that can persuade local communities and governments to look the corporate way, it is there. Now here in Athens, we're trying to be a little more proactive. We would like to keep the barn door shut, keep the horses in, and when they try to open the door, say, no, you're not going to do it. And of course, they'll be rather pouty about it, I suppose. But that's the way it goes. Now, the city of Athens has been very, very proactive in protecting its water supply. The city of Athens is wholly, completely dependent upon one source of water, and that is the Hocking River Valley Aquifer. It's nothing but sand and gravel. It's about, at the most, it can't be more than 100 feet deep, and it may be half a mile to a mile wide at some point. It goes up north all the way through Fairfield County, and several other communities draw water out of it, like Lancaster and Hocking, Logan and Nelsonville. They all get their water from that source, as does one of the water districts here, Leax. They have well fields in that. Then we have well fields, and then there's others further downstream. The problem with this fact that we only have one source, and the city of Athens draws, let's say about 5 million gallons a day comes out of that. That 5 million gallons serves 20,000 students who come and go. Every 4 years they turn over, but we have about 5,000 to 6,000 permanent residents who use it all the time. So that water is used by all the people that live here. The university has to have it, you know, for everything that they do. The city has to have
Sure.
it. Our schools, our elementary, our secondary schools, they all use the same water. The Plains, for example, is a city. They get their water from the city of Athens. The city of Athens sells them water. That water is used by the people of the Plains and also the high school. So no matter where you're going to go in the county, you're all pretty much, about 95% of everybody is using this water. If we allow an injection well to be placed in there, or a fracking well, and something goes wrong, and let's face it, things do go wrong. There was a couple of years ago a major oil rig that exploded in the Gulf of Mexico and created what is now considered the largest lawsuit in the history of the world, and it's still going on. We will never really know how much of Louisiana and Mississippi environment was destroyed. But that's, accidents happen, that's the point. An accident can happen, and in fact, if an accident can happen, it will happen. That's why you have regulations. You try to minimize the risk. If you say, well, we don't really need those regulations, you're basically saying, well, you know, these companies, they know what they're doing. You can trust them. I mean, that thing down in the Gulf, that was just, well, that doesn't happen very often. Well, actually, it happens. It's fairly common. So here we have this situation. So the city of Athens had several years ago set up what was called the Wellhead Protection Program. We have our well field. We have several wells that draw water out of this aquifer, and there is a zone around them that says, within this zone, thou shalt not, under any circumstances, and we do not care who you are, you will not drill a well. You will not dump your paint. You will not throw your old oil. You will not spill. You will not use herbicides. You will not do anything. And we are regulating you. We are telling you what you're going to do. Now, you may not like it, but that's the way it's going to be. We are limiting what you can do for the benefit of everybody else. Okay, so we expanded on that recently. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. We passed another ordinance that said, we now realize that ODNR can, in fact, site a well within our wellhead protection. They have the sole authority. Yeah, you do. We're saying, no, you can't. Okay, ODNR, no, you're not going to be able to do it. You cite it, we will sue. We will go into litigation. Well, that's been on the books now for 3 years, and so far nothing's happened. Okay, so now, with this new initiative, because our wellhead protection area only covers, maybe 20 acres. The city of Athens is 10 square miles. That's thousands of acres that are uncovered by this regulation. So what we're doing is, in fact, extending the wellhead protection to include the entire city. Everything within the boundaries of the city will be a protection zone for our water supply. Now, outside of our city limits, out into the county, where it goes into the LEAX areas and downstream, we have no control over that, and we're not saying that we do, and we're not attempting to do that. This is just strictly within the city of Athens. We're saying the citizens of the city of Athens have a right to vote on clean and safe water. And that's what we're pushing here, you know. And they will decide.
Trying to give them that choice.
That choice. Now, the city council could have passed an ordinance to the same effect as this initiative here. Myself, I was opposed to that idea because, even though I knew it would certainly pass, I thought that this issue is so important, and the ramifications of it are so great, that the entire city deserves a vote on it. Now, maybe the vote will go to the point where the majority will say, well, no, you guys, you're wrong. Fracking and waste disposal is a good idea in the city. and by golly, we have a majority, and we're going to vote this thing down. Well, that's the democratic process. That's the way it goes. And if that happens, I accept it. The citizens have spoken. I may not like it, but I'm not going to sabotage it. I'm not going to say, well, this fellow here has passed this or didn't pass it, and I'm really angry about it, and I just refuse to accept those results, and by golly, I won't. No, you don't do that. But everybody deserves a shot. They deserve a chance to vote on it. This is going to affect them. It's going to affect their kids. It's going to affect their livelihood, because if that water supply gets contaminated by fracking fluid or any other pollutant, this city dies. That's it. Now, I can't drive home that point strongly enough. If our water supply is turned off for more than 48 hours, this town dies. Now, that happened a few years ago during the derecho when the power died. It was a total disaster.
For 10 days.
For 10 days in some places. But what happened was the generators could not supply water from the well field to the treatment plant, and the treatment plant up to the reservoirs. There was a major accident that broke a main and drained the reservoirs dry. We couldn't fill them back up.
Right.
Okay, now you not only do you not have tap water, you don't have water for sewage disposal, you don't have water to eat,
right.
But now you have no water for fire protection. What do you do then if you're in the middle of a blackout, there's no electricity, and your house catches on fire? You can't even call because the phones don't work.
Right.
Okay, you have no water. So if the fire department came, they go, well, sorry, there's nothing in the hydrants.
These things are very interrelated, and I think that when you are talking about how hard we all worked, I think it's, it's very interesting to know that we had nearly 800 good signatures, valid signatures on these petitions that we acquired by going door to door and standing on street corners and approaching people about this simply to get the initiative on the ballot. And so in my mind, and speaking with a lot of those people door to door, Jeff, there were some real questions and some real concerns, and I think you've brought up a couple of really interesting points, one of them being that our aquifer is only 100 feet down. Mm-hmm. You know, I think this is, yeah, it's very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. And I think that when you're talking about our usage being about 5 million gallons a day, that's an interesting figure because it's about 5.5 to 6 to 7 million gallons of water that it takes to inject into every one of these fracking wells. Mm-hmm. And some of the questions that don't get answered or don't even become addressed when speaking to the public and when we're being sold the idea about why we need these, and to farmers and other landowners who perhaps are being approached about leasing, is where are they going to get that kind of water? Mm-hmm. Where are the sources for getting that kind of water to push into those wells all the time? Not to mention then all these issues of bringing out these waste materials and wastewater.
Exactly. Melina, may I add something to that?
Yes, John, of course.
People have often during this conversation said, well, why would they want to frack in Athens? Why should we need this kind of thing? And it's very interesting that, for instance, in the Broadview Heights experience, they are doing this fracking and injection wells right in town. And one of the reasons for doing it in town, there's an easy access to water. It's the city water supply. Exactly. And that's what Issue 7 says, no.
Right. And in fact, I know we all have seen some of those photographs, which are really stark from Broadview Heights. I remember the one story in particular about the one, I think she was a school teacher. She was a mother of children. She went to work. She agreed to lease her property. She came home, had no idea the enormity of this fracking operation. They are like small industrial complexes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't know that until they are built literally in your backyard. And in Broadview Heights, that's exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. It was built in her backyard, several hundred feet from her home. The noise, the fumes, the traffic with the trucks, the whole operation was so overwhelming. And most of the people who have leased, unless they are located very, very far away from these wells, they are very disturbed by the operations themselves, and many of them have chosen to move. I want to introduce another guest today, and that's Barb Campanella. Hello. And Barb, you and I have beaten the streets on with those petitions and twice actually. We went around and approached our neighbors and friends and students and everybody else. And you and I have both had some very interesting experiences with some of the people who have either stories to tell or questions about it. And I wondered if you were telling me earlier about one of the gentlemen that you encountered. I thought that was kind of an interesting story because you kind of put the ball back in his court. But you might...
Well, people have all kinds of concerns, and I think to be objective, it's good to look at all sides of every story. And this committee is not about, I personally am completely opposed to all fracking, but the committee and this bill is to give you the right to say you want this or you don't. That's even, there were many people, I was ill-received by a few people, and the one gentleman I spoke to was very concerned about the lawsuit, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what we are trying to do is if we can pass this, there would be a lawsuit to stop it, and the lawsuit would force these companies to disclose the chemicals that are being used. And it will stop, at least for a while. It may not stop it forever. And this fellow is very concerned about the cost of a lawsuit. And I was just told that we have insurance. It won't cost our city dollars to fight this in court because we have insurance, sorry. And then I raised the question, well, who is going to be paying the city to repair roads? These trucks are enormous. I was in a head-on collision in Benton County because the roads were not maintained and they were traveled by huge trucks over and over, and it indented the highway. There were many people killed on that stretch of road, so that's to be considered. But when the fellow was concerned about that, he said, I'm not going to support this because I don't bend. And I said, well, think about it this way. Do you want your water sold? How would you feel if there was a drought or there was a shortage of water and you were competing with fracking companies for water, for your very own water, and they were using thousands of gallons of water and you were being restricted? That was a problem too. And so I think when he thought about the ownership of his water, that brought it home for him. We want to own our water. As a city, we want to own the right to our water. This is not to mention the fact that we want safe, clean water. I used to work for a indoor air quality company many, many years ago and did research. This is when I became passionate about these chemicals. I did research into the thousands of pounds of fertilizers, pesticides, and chemicals that are released. It's an unbridled amount. They're not controlled. And I don't believe that chemical companies really have our best interest in mind and at heart. And yes, there's going to be an accident. There's going to be an accident. There always are accidents. And we can't take that chance. We can't take the chance of any of those hideous toluenes and benzenes, and they're carcinogens. One accident and we're screwed.
And people asked us, I remember these questions when we were petitioning. So many people would say, but where could they put a fracking well? Or where could they put in an injection well? I kept saying, I'm a little more concerned about where they could put injection wells. And I said, well, actually, there are lots of places in Athens. You know, when you look at the 12, is it 12, Jeff? 12 square miles of Athens City?
10, yeah.
10 square miles. So you've got the edge, all of the edge of Stroud's Run, which is Sells Park, which is, you've got all of the ridges which belong to Ohio University. Those, you know, there's couple, 250 acres or something up there. You've got a spot, you've got Columbus Road, you've got across Harmony Road across the highway there that's still within the
Plenty of
city
room.
limits. So there is just an awful lot. In fact, you've got available space owned by the city and that stretches all the way out to Holzer Clinic, And so you really, in fact, there are places. And when I brought this up to people, you could see them stop and question it and think about it a moment, because they were living someplace close to one of those sites, and they thought, it hadn't occurred to them.
I think we owe it to our children and our grandchildren and ourselves to ask the question, is there even the remotest possibility that these injection wells could leak? Well, yes, of course, I think there is. But if in your heart you think there is the most remote of possibilities, then we're condoning somewhat of a mass poisoning. Mm-hmm. And if that is the case, if someone could say to me, I promise, or there will not be, this is fail-safe, I don't think it is, and just based on that alone is enough for me to join this committee and just asking that question.
John, what do you think about any response to Barbara about this?
Well, I think Barbara's concern is well-founded.
Sure.
I want to speak to this issue of earthquakes, which have occurred in these areas where injection wells have and fracking has gone on. This has occurred down in Oklahoma, and of course it has occurred in northeastern Ohio, and we had one in Athens County, as a matter of fact, earthquake. And I remember being assured by the oil and gas people when this conversation really started that, these injection wells and so on and the fracking, this is a mile down. This is far below where the aquifers are, so there's no possibility of problem because these rock layers are impermeant, so there's nothing that could get through. And I couldn't help think about then earthquakes and how these rock layers would stay impermeant when they're in fact moving against one another.
Exactly.
That kind of assurance kind of doesn't really stack up. And the other kind of assurance is that, yes, there have been many, many wells drilled without problems. Well, in the time that we've been looking at them. But the point is, whether it's steel pipes or concrete, over long periods of time, these things do decay. We know that. I mean, you can see the concrete under the bridges decaying.
Right.
So, in the long run, as Barb has pointed out, there will be the accidents. There will be leakage. That has to be. And are we willing to accept that for our grandchildren and their children?
There's another something that I wanted to talk about. If we're just trying to be objective in making our decision here. So if there is this possibility that exists, that there will be a mistake that exists, then we have to look at not only what we were talking about, the city would die. I'm the director of an arts organization, and the organization is Paper Circle, and we make paper. And I'll start with the small story of us. We make paper, and we're dependent on water. And paper is something that we do. We love it. We make paper for origami artists around the world. But we also serve at-risk children where we have a large umbrella of people in Nelsonville that we serve. If the water was tainted, we would immediately have to close our doors, immediately. It's not that we could go get a jug of water. We use hundreds of gallons of water in the paper making process. So everything that we do, and we're just a tiny little organization, but when you put all of us tiny nonprofit arts organizations together, the economy, I brought some facts here. There was a study done by the late Bob Winters. He got it together. The arts in Ohio, in Athens County alone, create 800 full-time equivalent jobs. It brings $24.3 million in arts-related economic activity to the area and $2.2 million in government revenue to the Athens County area. And this beautiful country that we live in, this beautiful county that we live in, I should say, if we're threatening our very livelihood. The arts are a huge economic driver in the area, as is food. And we are being watched by the whole nation. What is going on in Athens County? Everybody who is involved, I used to own a restaurant, so I was very involved in the food movement. No water, no food. No food movement. So the university is not the only economic driver. It's a main one, but it's not the only economic driver. There are people who live in this county who have worked very hard to create alternative energy. Why aren't we investing in alternative energy in this area? And we are. But so there are a lot of economic considerations. The food industry, and I know our little small nonprofit, it would be over. And that's another huge consideration.
Well, in June, Ohio became the first state to freeze all renewable energy standards. So when you're talking about, I mean, we seem to be going backwards in time. You know,
Right.
it's not the progressive state it was when I was growing up, it seems to me. But when you're talking about food producers, you're talking about. We are famous in Athens for our farmers market. It is well known across the nation, certainly in the state of Ohio, and these people have brought millions of dollars to the economy in Athens County. And they come from all over, and they depend on those businesses, and they depend on water for the maple sugar growers, and every kind of food that's produced out there is dependent upon water. So, you know, where can they go if there's something?
If there's just one modicum of doubt, and in my mind there is, then I'm not allowed to say what I will do when it comes to voting, but maybe you can guess.
Well, you've already been doing a lot, and that's to really be a part of this whole committee and really working hard. John, any comment from you about this?
Yes, I'd like to speak a little bit more about the about issue 7 itself.
Yes, please.
And you can read the entire document by going to the WOUB Water Project website.
Okay.
That's one of the most convenient places to read the whole thing. It was curious. I went to the Board of Elections to see if I could read it there, and it isn't there, nor is it on the League of Women Voters website.
Oh.
I tried to find it there. Now, maybe it's there and I just didn't find it.
No, it's not. They don't put issues.
Okay. So in order to read the whole thing, if you'd like to be fully informed, then go to the WOUB website on their water project, and you can read the whole thing. But what it asserts is that we have these rights, and the rights that are enumerated in issue 7 are 1, to potable water, and that's what we've been discussing here primarily. Healthy environment, and that too has been touched on in terms of the consequence of air pollution and the unhealthiness of water pollution, for that matter. Freedom from chemical trespass. What it states is, if that anybody else outside of Athens essentially causes a problem here, then they are to be held accountable for the damage that they do here. Now, that's a general principle in law. That is to say, you own some property and your neighbor does some damage to it, you can hold them responsible. So this is nothing new. We aren't trying to tell another neighbor how to behave. But on the other hand, we all tell our neighbors how to behave, namely, don't mess up my property. And basically that's the analogy that's here in this freedom from chemical trespass. And we would hope that that other communities that share this aquifer that Jeff was talking about might take similar steps, because we know that we are, although we can say, well, we're going to hold you responsible for the damage, we don't want the damage to occur, as has been outlined here.
Right.
So we would hope that other communities might take similar steps and follow the lead that Athens voters will perhaps take next month. Another thing that's specified in the bill, in the issue 7, is the rights of natural communities. And people may question that. What does that mean, the rights of natural communities? What is a natural community, and how can it have rights under law? The reason why this is in there is as follows. If somebody pollutes the river and you want to object legally, and you try to go to court to do that, but you aren't directly damaged by that pollution, the court will tell you, you have no standing. You can't generate this lawsuit against the person who polluted that river. What this notion of the natural communities, the rights of natural communities, says that these natural communities, and by this we don't mean a square inch in your yard, that you can't move a dandelion. What is obviously intended here, and there is admittedly some ambiguity, but what is clearly intended here are major ecological features that impact us all, such as rivers.
Right.
So it would allow then for anyone to, at least within the city of Athens, to essentially to generate a lawsuit against someone who is in fact interfering with the water supply, that is to say, dumping toxins in the river, because now that river would have standing, and it's the issue specifies that any citizen then is entitled to essentially take action, and I've forgotten what the legal term for that is. It's in here, but I just forgot what it is right now. In defense of that natural community. So it allows us to essentially protect these elements of the natural communities which are essential for our health and well-being and in fact survival. So that's why this right of natural communities is in there. It also, there are two other things that are specified. We have the right to a sustainable energy future. And this is obviously a general comment that in a sense has no way to be enforced. There are other features of the initiative that do have ways of being enforced, but not this. So what it specifies, though, is that we realize that there is an argument that people make about the need for the fracking process in order to produce these fuels on which we are dependent. What we are arguing here is that in the long run, we have to move away from that into sustainable fuels. And this is just a statement to that effect.
Our wish list, if you will.
A wish list, that's right, yeah. And the final thing is perhaps the most important, it's the most fundamental, and that is the right to self-government. That is to say, issues that affect people directly ought to be essentially decided by the people who are being affected. So this right to self-government, and again, people will recognize that there are limits to self-government. There are certain things that have to be decided at the state and national levels. No state is entitled to have slavery right now. They can't do that despite the fact that they might want to vote for it, because what that does is it violates other inalienable rights that are specified in our Constitution. Short of that, however, things ought to be decided on as local a level as is practical and possible, and that is the nature of self-government.
You're talking about this chemical trespass, and I wanted to touch upon that for a moment, because you're speaking about it from one side of the fence here in what, and yet you know, I can remember 3 years ago when we began going to these meetings that were held all over the state, and we went to Marietta and to Logan and several of these, and they were pretty, the crowd was pretty much dominated by a lot of the gas and oil men, mostly men. In fact, in one meeting, I was only one of 5 women there. But I've been listening to so many people and talking about this issue for so many years, and I remember several people responding to me, particularly a couple of farmers who were at the farmers market, about the fact that because these fracking wells are drilled deep and are horizontal, and the fracking people, the corporations make no bones about it. Their goal, if it's to go from property A to property C, and they have signed leases with the owners of properties A and C, they have no qualms, nor is there any law against them drilling straight across property B. And so a couple of these owners were property B owners, and they came to me because they knew I was involved with this committee and said, well, what should we do? All of our neighbors have signed these leases, and we're just terrified because we have a big farm, and we don't want them drilling across our property. And we've been told, so this in my mind is just an outrage, number one, and it is, if it isn't chemical trespass, I don't know what else you could call it, you know, that they could, without a lease and without the authority to trespass against that person's land. Now, be it that far down in the ground, it's still, if they own the mineral rights and the rights to their property wholly and solely, they should not be allowed the company should not be allowed, in my mind, to go from property A to C across property B. But that has happened, John, in many instances. So, you know, this is another one of those arguable kinds of things that come up. Have you heard of this a lot, Jeff? Or
yeah, it usually happens when you have a block of land that is so chopped up that the drillers can't sign a lease with just, say, 1 or 2 landowners.
Yes.
They actually have to get a group, and the way the laws are written, that if they get a certain number of landowners within that block to sign on, then it becomes a fait accompli. They'll go in and drill.
Okay, so that's how it's
But
done.
the other landowners will have to be compensated in some way, because they're even though they haven't leased their natural resources, they're entitled to some compensation, because as you are drawing a fluid out of the ground from one spot, fluid in another spot that has not been touched will now begin to migrate from to fill in the void. Well, that means as a landowner, I'm now suffering a loss. I need to be compensated for that. So technically, they're supposed to write them a royalty check as well, as if they had signed that lease. Now with this new horizontal technique where you can just drill one well and then branch out like an octopus all over the place, they could very easily drill down to, you know, next to your piece of property and just kick over and pretty soon they're underneath it, and you would never know it.
Exactly.
Never
This is
know.
what this particular
And then, you know,
farmer was
after
concerned.
it all happens, then you go, oh, well, oh, by golly, it did happen. Sorry about that.
Oops.
Oops, yeah. Here's a check. Yeah, see, it's all better now.
And sometimes checks are not good. I've just returned recently from visiting my daughter in California, and having lived there for 25 years, I mean, we've gone through droughts. They are in the middle of a severe, severe drought now. To the extent to which Northern California farmers, cattle and horse farmers, are actually selling off their animals if they can, slaughtering them because they can't water them anymore. They can't grow feed to feed them. And I saw on the face of the LA Times on a Sunday, I was so stunned because of my involvement with this whole anti-fracking movement. And here were it was a whole map of the state of California and the geology and the areas where they were going to, where they are locating these fracking drilling operations. And they're just coming right down, some of them in Northern California, down through the Southern California area, right along the San Andreas Fault. And having experienced a lot of earthquakes in the time, and in fact, having had my home destroyed in the 1994 Northridge earthquake, sitting right on the epicenter of that quake, I can tell you that, you know, if we have our fears of flooding, they have their fears of earthquake, and they're very real, and they're, you know, and then if they are complicated by the thought of, I just remember when the 1994 earthquake happened, and I was actually in Europe at the time, but as soon as I came back, you know, there were ruptured gas lines and electricity was out all over Los Angeles. And we were talking 11 million people, and we had people camped out in tents in their backyard for weeks, you know, people hospitalized. People forget that 32 people died in that quake, and many, many more injured, and loads of property damaged. So, you know, I think of your concerns, John, about the earthquakes in Ohio. I think of Barbara's concerns about safe water for all of our businesses and our children and our food services and, you know, farmers, just so many kinds of businesses, large or small. We don't have a lot of time. This has been a rather rapid progress. But are there any things that we think we might have missed in talking about issue 7 and its importance for people to, I wish there were more places for them to, where they could become familiar, our community, with the issue. But if they get on WOUB and look at the water project, they can certainly review it there. And I would say,
vote. Everyone needs to get out and vote. Whether you're going to vote for this or against it, vote.
Yes, everyone needs to vote for something. But any other concerns or anything about the issue that we've neglected to say? Or
well, I'd just like to return to something that Jeff said earlier.
Yes.
This concern about lawsuits, and that just to think. And Barb has already pointed out that that's really not an issue of cost because of the insurance. But I noticed there was a letter in the Athens News, I think, today on that point. And all I could think of when I read it, he was saying, well, it cost $500,000 for the city to take care of this suit that involved the strip club issue.
Right.
And I was thinking, well, if we lose our water because of something that the $500,000 you know,
it's a drop in the bucket.
It's a drop in the bucket. And the other thing is that we are not alone in this. There are 4 other cities that have already passed these things.
Right.
And as Jeff pointed out, we've had this water, the water protection, the zone.
Wellhead protection.
The wellhead protection. Thank you. And the sky hasn't fallen in terms of legal challenges. There are 3 other cities having the same thing on the ballot in November in Ohio.
Right.
Columbus has started a very active effort to gain signatures to do a similar Bill of Rights in Columbus. So we are not alone with this. The sky will not fall in any way, and we might actually be able to protect ourselves.
And I'd like to just close with the idea that my hometown of Mansfield, the fracking operation did pull away from Mansfield. That law director, Mr. Spahn, is coming here to speak in Athens in October. I believe it's October 23rd, if I'm correct. Anyway, we will be advertising that. He's been famous for reversing the trend in the city of Mansfield. So I encourage all of our community to please come out and hear him speak. I think it's a very worthwhile conversation. They've been successful in not being sued and actually reversing the trend there. So
it is the 23rd, and it's at the Athens Community Center.
Oh, great.
At 7 p.m.
Good, good. Okay. Barbara, thank you. Jeff, John, thank you so much. And
thank you, Melinda.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks a lot.